recent video a little bit about the Kennedy family and some of the oddities and overall things that some think are accidents, some other ones think is fate, and others maybe even a pact with the devil. So head over there if you're interested. I'd love to have you join and be part of the Patreon family. I also have a membership, and with a membership here on the channel, you can click on join, and that way you can watch these videos ad-free. Now, let's talk about what happened on the morning of June 8, 1992. It was a typical day for this lady going to work. She typically walked through the churchyard at St. Joseph's Church in Sandham, North Holland. Now, in this area of the church, they had a large pond, and as kind of a typical morning, she would walk her way to work, and particularly she would walk on the grass between the concrete and the pond. When she spotted that morning a shoe and then what seemed to be blood on the grass leading into the pond. At first, she thought that somebody injured maybe fell into the pond. So she ran into the church and found the pastor, who walked with her outside and promised her that he would call the police and that she should continue her way to work. The pastor decided to go to his home to make that call. His home was just by the church, and he had a pretty good view of the pond. And that is when he found or spotted the body of a young girl. Now, let's rewind a little bit, because that's kind of the end of our story. And this case makes a lot more sense to start there. But if we rewind, we are going to talk about Milica Van Doorn, who at the time was a beautiful 19-year-old blonde girl that recently graduated from high school. Now, in different countries, high school graduation works in different ways. For me in particular, in my country where I'm from, you not only those exams are the same that we have back home, but I do know that in different countries works, their education system works differently. Milica was the middle daughter. There were three sisters, and they live in that town of Zandam, the town I mentioned in North Holland. This is kind of on the banks of the Zan River region. But on the evening of Sunday, June 7th, 1992, Milica was going to a birthday party. And this party was at her friend's apartment. The apartment was on Flutergroot Road in Cockerbound, which is in the district of Zandam. But she'd still have to take a short bus from her house. She's done this before several times, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to ride the bus. While at the party, she asked a friend about the bus schedule that night. She was planning her, the time that she was going to leave the party, and she wanted to make sure that she was going to be able to catch the bus on time. Her friend told her, "Don't worry, the buses run here every 30 minutes, and they never fail." So, around midnight, Milica was saying goodbye to her friends and went to the bus stop. Now, this is about 200 yards away from the apartment building. When she got there, she realized that her friend forgot that there was this festival, the Pentecost festival, that weekend. So the bus schedule changed. And the last one for that night was at 11:24 p.m. So Milica decided to walk to the train station. She did this before and she was familiar with the area. And even a few people saw her walking towards the train station that night. Sadly, the next person to see her was that pastor who found the young girl's body. And that girl was Milica. It was terrible. Let's describe this. Savage injuries, deep stab wounds to her neck. Her throat had been slit. She was also sexually assaulted, and even were able this killer to justice. Now, just a few days after finding her body in the churchyard pond, Milica's family received her final year school results in the mail. Milica passed all her exams with flying colors, and that would have easily qualified her to go to school to become a teacher. The police questioned the couple that testified seeing Milica on the street on the night of the murder. They also mentioned in that statement seeing a man who appeared to be of Turkish descent, I guess, and he was riding a bicycle. They remembered this guy because he had been singing and came up behind them on the bike and then passed them as Milica was walking in the opposite direction. One thing they noticed is that the man turned around and headed back in the path that Milica was walking. This was weird, but eventually they lost sight of both of them. This man was not able to be identified, but that was one of the first things they got. Now, DNA and identifying somebody with DNA kind of started in the 80s, but it took a long time to develop sophisticated techniques to be used in court. The initial DNA testing methods also required a lot of, or I should say, large samples, and any testing done on smaller samples had the risk of using up the specimen entirely and leaving absolutely nothing for future testing when technology improved. Because of this, many homicide investigators across the world who investigated cases in the 1990s and early 2000s would often kind of hold off on performing DNA tests because, again, they ran the risk of using the sample entirely. So the first time that they did investigated 75 men with Turkish ancestry, and they all lived in the area in the year 1992. They were all asked to submit a DNA sample, and they all did, but nothing came out of that. At this time, ancestral DNA was becoming commonly used, and the public called for this to be used in Milica's case. Familial DNA, that kind of test, is a broader pool of donors who they kind of check their ancestral DNA connections. It is a very interesting process, and for somebody very into details, really. But this type of testing helps to identify the perpetrators, brothers, cousins, nephews, rather than just the one profile, which kind of widens the possibilities. But unfortunately, in the year 2008, the law in the Netherlands it was forbidden, really, to use this for criminal cases, and it was considered as invasive of personal privacy. And it took 8 years before familial DNA research was made legal in the country, and another 18 months until the new DNA search could start. So, the examiner collected DNA from 133 men with Turkish ancestry who lived in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and they handed it over to the Forensic Institute for Familial DNA Testing. On December 9th, 2017, the NFI contacted the investigating officers on Milica's case, and they had a match. They were able to identify the brother of the offender that voluntarily gave DNA sample. So a suspect was identified, and his name was Hussein A. And he was arrested. In 1992, he was living a few hundred yards from the pond where Milica's body was found. Since then, he had married, and he had 4 children. He had no match or no record, and he later on would hire a lawyer that claimed that he was possessed the night of Milica's sentence Hussein to 20 years in prison, which was what the prosecutor requested. At the time, he was 47 years old, so he still had a possibility of being released by the age of 67. I don't know if this is justice or not. I think in the end it's a matter of your personal opinion. If you really think about it, this guy moved on, I guess, after what he did to Milica. He stayed out of trouble. He had a wife and kids and a family. And according to authorities, he never got in trouble with the law after that. But what about Milica and her dreams of becoming a teacher? Finding the right guy, getting married, having children. And this guy had 26 years after what he did to her to build a life, even have children of his own. And just the thought that he'd be young enough to get out of jail to enjoy his children and grandchildren is just mind-boggling. And just the thought of him living 26 years in the same house nearby the church, nearby that pond, is just crazy to think about. After something like that. Is it possible that he did something that authorities were not able to catch him? Maybe he took another girl, and I guess it's possible. And the thing that bothered me the most is that he never gave his version of the events for that night. So we still don't know what happened. And just the idea of an adult, really, a young lady, walking home at night, and a grape like this kind of cross her path, and this ended up being a new reality. I guess it's just crazy to me, and I don't think I can wrap my head around it. I moved to the States when I was 18 years old. I turned 18 in November the year 2000, and by February 2001 I was in the US. But I can tell you that is very common for teenagers to walk home after a party, and even though, there's a lot of violence and things that are known to happen, I know I walked home more than 10 blocks story kind of throws that concept out and keeps us on our toes. And it's just unbelievable that this kind of thing can happen. That this guy doesn't have a conscience. So he really doesn't want to say what happened that night. It's just mind-boggling, really. But anyways, let me know what you think about today's case in the comments down below. Thank you so much for being here today, guys. I hope that you are enjoying listening to some of the stories that you guys requested.